You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Oh yeah, baby, that's lovely. Good morning, and welcome to Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News. It is April 13th, 2023, even though my notes say 2022. And you are live here with News Hawks, Al Graham, and myself, Reverend Cindy, from the Legacy420.com news desk. And we are live here on the network's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Boxcast locations such as Roku, paceradio.net, cbgtv.com on a Fire Stick. We're just kind of all over the place. You can find us almost everywhere. Morning, Al.
Good morning, Cindy. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. Glenn, unfortunately, is having some technical issues today. We have figured out a way for him to come back next week. So all of you people that are missing him, he will be back. He's not gone for long. Yeah, he's not gone for long.
Exactly.
So, Al,
well, you know what? I guess that's what happens when you're in 80-degree weather all the time, right? You just have
it's a sad thing to have to take the day off work because you're stuck in Costa Rica. It's a terrible burden to bear for Glenn, but we know that he will do it with a smile.
Yeah, and he is determined to get some internet access. He really wants to do the broadcast, and he's disappointed he's having the internet issues, and we'll get that solved for him for next week. So
absolutely he'll be back, but I've got Al, so we will still get through the 8 stories, and it'll still be fantastic. Absolutely. So we might as well hop over to the first story coming to us from mainstream media, CTV News. Mississauga, Ontario, they're set to reconsider the ban on the retail stores.
It's ridiculous why they did this in the first place anyways. Ontario's largest municipality without any legal cannabis retail stores is set to reconsider its prohibition on Wednesday, with City Report highlighting that its residents are disproportionately served by the illegal market. And that would have been yesterday that they would have decided this. Mississauga, Ontario is one of dozens of municipalities to bar retail cannabis stores from the communities when legalization came into effect in 2018. The Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario is responsible for issuing licenses, but the government left it up to municipalities on whether they wanted to opt in or opt out.
Yeah, crazy. Now, 4.5 years later, with more than 1,700 legal stores across the province of Ontario, and the sector contributing $13.3 billion to Ontario's GDP. Per a recent diligent analysis cited in a city staff report, there's a push to get Mississauga on board. City councillors are set to discuss a motion Wednesday from councilperson Deepika Demerla to lift the ban on cannabis. Mississauga has spent the past several years advocating for more municipal control over the location of stores, but it has become clear that it's not going to happen, as she writes in her motion.
In the meantime, she says, what I have found is that there has been a proliferation of illegal stores in Mississauga. So now my choice is not between no stores and legal stores. So the choice now is between illegal stores or legal stores.
Yeah. The OCS, the province's wholesaler for legal retailers, reports that the legal market has been steadily growing since 2018 and eating into illegal business. That's because they're all moving over. More than 50% of cannabis sales are now through the legal market, the OCS reports. According to the OCS, Mississauga continues to be disproportionately served by the illegal market compared to communities that have opted out, the Mississauga staff report says. And like I said here a second ago, a lot of the legacy people, they're calling illegal, but a lot of the legacy people have worked very hard to get approval via the government, so they can do what they've done for years, quote unquote, illegally, and now do it without the repercussions. And they're bringing legacy to the legal market and doing that. And you see a lot of that. I mean, that's what's cutting out a lot of the legacy or the illegal market, I think.
And people sometimes are just finding it easier just to go down to the store and grab some cannabis instead of waiting for a buddy who might not make it back that night because he's waiting on somebody else.
Yep, absolutely.
So. In Demira's ward, police have tried 6 times to shut down one illegal cannabis store, but the operators just show up the next day, cut the chains off, and open as usual, she says. So we have a situation where the long arm of the law is unable to stop the illegal guy. Meanwhile, I am stopping the legal guys, which she says is not a tenable situation.
No, the city staff report cites a study by the National Research Council of Canada on behalf of the OCS and the Ontario Provincial Police that found great inconsistency in the amount of THC in legacy cannabis edibles and dangerously high levels of pesticides. Well, we've seen that in legal cannabis too. As well, illegal products often have brightly colored packaging that would appeal to children, the study found. Omar Khan, the Chief Communication and Public Affairs Officer for retailer High Tide Incorporated, is set to give a deposition Wednesday and has several examples of illegal products available in Mississauga that are designed to look like popular candy items.
If council votes to allow the legal regulated sector on an opportunity to move into Mississauga and set up shop, we know from experience in other municipalities, particularly neighboring municipalities like Toronto and in Brampton, that will really take a big bite out of the illicit market and their sales in Mississauga.
Yeah, that's important because it's important from the perspective of protecting our kids. It's important from the perspective of protecting public health, but it's also important from the perspective of taking revenue away from criminal activity. A general committee on which all Mississauga councillors sit is set to discuss the city staff report Wednesday and debate the issue. And Demirla said her motion may come to a vote the same day, or it may be voted upon at a full council meeting next week.
Now, one of Mississauga's concerns is in 2018 was around a desire to avoid clustering or having several stores in one block. But city staff canvassed neighboring municipalities with legal cannabis and found there wasn't a huge concern there. Even in Toronto, the OCS reports that there were fewer stores permitted to open in March of 2023 than in May of 2021.
Yeah.
As it goes on to say that I think Mississauga was well served by the wait and see approach because we sort of bypassed the whole clustering of stores and then some of them shutting down.
Yeah, we bypassed that because now the market's mature, or a little bit more mature than it was. There's sort of they're sort of aware of the risks of clustering. And George Smitherman, who's the president and CEO of Cannabis Council of Canada, which represents licensed producers and processors, said the gold rush mentality of the early days of legalization is dissipating. Yeah.
Part of the stabilization of the sector, in a certain sense, is more of a stark realism about the realities of the business, he says. He goes on to say, I think that this, in a certain sense, will temper the enthusiasm of real store proponents. That's quite different than the environment of 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. It's come a long way. And, there are a lot of people that are involved in the legacy market. Redbeard, for example, it's the first guy that pops to my mind. He grew in the legacy market and worked in the legacy market for years. And then when the legal market came along and they started opening up to craft cannabis growers, he pulled his socks up and said, okay, I'm going legal. And he's done a fantastic job. I had his product before he went legal and I had his product after, and it's the same product. And he does a very good job.
I got my Remo joints.
And there's another example, right?
Yeah.
And his joints are amazing.
I just looked up to see if there was anything listed there on Mississauga, because they kept saying about on Wednesday, and there was nothing there. There was just sort of the same stories that we had right now. So there's none.
I went looking late last night as well. But it's always good to double check for sure. Over to Mugglehead Magazine, we're going to talk about Tilray is reporting a $1.1 billion in losses during the third quarter of 2023, and they acquire Hexo for
Okay,
75 million.
you lose that much money, but you're buying a company? I don't know. I don't know. Tilray Brands lost $1.1 billion this quarter because of higher interest and a decline in market capitalization. But the company says loss doesn't impact its cash flow or liquidity. The leading cannabis producer announced its financial results for the third fiscal quarter ended February 28th and reported $145 million in net revenue compared to $144 million in the prior quarter. The company recorded a non-cash $1.1 billion loss in net assets from interest rates and market capitalization.
Good Lord.
Ouch.
On a constant currency basis, net revenue increased by 2% to $154.2 million compared to the same quarter in previous years. Distribution revenue also saw an increase of 5% to $65.4 million from the prior year quarter. And on a consistent currency basis, distribution revenue increased by 12% to $70.1 million. Gross profit or loss was reported at a loss of $11.7 million, while adjusted gross profits were $44.3. Gross margin was negative 8%. I mean, I don't really understand how a lot of this stuff works. Do you?
Some of it I do. Just depends on what part we're discussing. Yeah.
Yeah. Adjusted cannabis gross profits increased by 22.2 million from 18.0 million in the prior year quarter, and adjusted gross margin percentages increased 47% from 33%. So depending on what area you're looking at, they're going up or down.
Yeah. The in the end, the big number on the top on that headline is scary. But they say here the company remains in a strong financial position with $408 million in cash and marketable securities and has reiterated its expectation to deliver positive free cash flow from operating segments in 2023. So
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and it goes on below. You can see down there below. It says the company also announced it's set to acquire Hexo, however you want to pronounce it, for a total price of $56 million, which is $75 million Canadian. And Tilray will issue basically 43 cents of its common share for each Hexo share outstanding to satisfy the acquisition.
Yeah, and this move comes after a successful strategic alliance between the two companies and is aimed at positioning Tilray for continued growth and market leadership in Canada. The completion of the arrangement is subject to customary and negotiated closing conditions, of course, which include Hexo shareholder approval and court approval, and is expected to take place this June.
Yeah, exactly. According to Hexo's chairman, Mark Atanesso, the company has been implementing a strict plan to reduce costs and optimize its balance sheet over the past year. And he explained that when Hexo began collaborating with Tilray last year, it became evident right away that the combination of their businesses could create significant value and enable them to compete more effectively while achieving profitable growth in the Canadian market.
With the recent headwinds in the cannabis industry, our board determined that Hexo, how are we pronouncing that?
Hexo.
Anyway, their shareholders would benefit from being part of the Tilray's diversified business, and from the strong plan in place they have to reinforce their industry leadership, continue to strengthen the top and bottom lines, and to drive value creation. With Irwin and his leadership team, we are confident that our brands will continue to grow and thrive as part of the Tilray brands.
Yeah. So they say that it's going to strengthen their position because of this purchase. And they say the combined company is projected to have a 12.9% pro forma market share in Canada, maintain its leading position across all major markets. They anticipate a pro forma net sales of approximately $205 million, and the low-cost operations will have distribution across all Canadian regions.
Mm.
So we'll see what happens down the road, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be interesting. I mean, Tilray has been making moves. We hear about them quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, we do.
I'm clicking buttons. I'll get there.
Yeah, I know. Go ahead. Click away.
click, 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 click.
If you almost need a hidden border operator, somebody who doesn't even know that people don't even know they're here.
Yeah, to do all the clicking for us. That would be pretty cool, a producer. But until then, I guess one of us will do it. We are heading over to Marijuana Moment, and over there we're going to learn that Michigan cannabis sales hit record high of $250 million in March. The state data shows.
Wow. Michigan marijuana sales reached a record high in March with nearly $250 million in combined recreational and medical cannabis purchases, according to the state regulators. The lion's share of those sales came from the adult use market, which saw $239.8 million worth of cannabis products sold last month, and the medical purchases reached basically $10 million during the same time span, according to New Cannabis Ventures.
Oh, okay, so let's just read that again. Recreational sold $239.8 million, and medical topped it up with $10 million.
Correct. Yeah, it's
Wow.
big difference, eh?
Yeah. Most of the cannabis purchases came from flower, followed by vape cartridges and infused edibles. The Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency data shows the state is seeing these record-setting sales, even as the average cost of cannabis has remained at record lows, with the price of an ounce now hovering around $90 in December of 2021. By contrast, the cost of an ounce was about $180. So yeah, it's come way down.
Wow. I know a guy who used to live in Minnesota. And he told me, this was a couple of years ago, but $400 for an ounce, and he said it was wet. Just couldn't. Yeah. He doesn't live there anymore. While the state's cannabis market has continued to mature, businesses still face challenges under federal prohibition, including a lack of access to traditional financial services that has created a cash-intensive industry that is uniquely targeted by crime. And the Attorney General of Michigan said last month that a string of break-ins at cannabis dispensaries in the state underscore the need for Congress to pass cannabis banking reform. It's so stupid that they don't. We've
been. I mean, that's been.
It's affecting worldwide, not just themselves.
Yeah, and it's ongoing, and they could have passed it a gajillion times, and it's just kind of like they want to drag it on. Meanwhile, former Michigan House Speaker Rick Johnson, who's a Republican, who went on to chair the state's cannabis licensing board, caught headlines this morning after a federal prosecutor charged him for allegedly taking bribes in exchange for providing privileged information and assistance to select license applicants, which I think we're about to go talk about. He and other defendants reached a plea agreement in this case. That's what Michigan's going through.
Regulators announced last year that they were issuing another round of grants to support research into the therapeutic benefits of cannabis for military veterans using tax dollars the state generated from adult use sales. This time around, CRA recommended awarding $20 million in grants to universities as part of the Veteran Marijuana Research Grant Program. $20 million is given away to veterans for research.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. From cannabis sales.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Officials also announced last year that the state would be distributing nearly $150 million in tax revenue from cannabis sales divided between localities, public schools, and transportation fund.
Wow. I lost the story, so I apologize.
Did you? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Michigan is just one of numerous states that are reporting strong cannabis sales as more markets come online and expand. For example, Connecticut saw a record $22 million combined recreational and medical sales last month, and Missouri cannabis sales reached $126 million in March, the second month since adult use shops opened in the state after voters approved its legalization. And the governor in New Mexico recently marked the one-year anniversary and touting it's more than $300 million in sales since last April. So basically over the last year. Wow. Arizona, the year total for 2022 in adult use was $1.4 billion. Wow.
In Arizona alone.
Just in one state. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And in Massachusetts, the state's recreational market exceeded $4 billion in sales since launching in January of 2018. So 4 years, $4 billion in sales.
Wow. $1 billion a year. That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. That's a lot of cannabis.
That's a lot of cannabis. Especially, if the prices are coming down, that's a lot of cannabis.
Yeah, and I just can't understand why the federal government won't change their whole attitude on it. It's ridiculous. Numbers like that, that's an invite for trouble if they're not allowing any cannabis regulation when it comes to the banking and all that.
Yep.
Ridiculous.
Yep. Wow.
All right.
Well,
I'm done.
thank you for finishing that up, because like I said, I hit a button that I shouldn't have hit by accident, and poof, it was gone. So thank you.
No problem.
No problem. We're going to head over to
I didn't know. I was glad.
What's that?
I'm glad you told me.
Yes.
I'm glad you told me you couldn't see it. Yeah. Go ahead.
We're heading over to Politico now, and we're going to talk about that House Speaker that was charged. A former Michigan House Speaker has been charged with accepting bribes for cannabis licenses.
Yeah. Rick Johnson, a former Republican Michigan House Speaker turned cannabis regulator, received more than $110,000 in bribes in exchange for supporting companies seeking medical cannabis licenses, alleges a federal charging document filed in federal district court on Thursday. Johnson was charged alongside three defendants: John Delele, a business owner charged with paying bribes; Brian Pierce and Vincent Brown, lobbyists charged with conspiracy to commit bribery.
Oh my goodness. All four defendants signed plea deals admitting guilt to the charges. The cannabis industry has been held out as an equalizing opportunity, U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan, Mark Totten, said at a press conference Thursday. Yet what we've learned today is that one of its key leaders acted corruptly and did so at a moment that mattered most for those who want to get ahead in the industry.
Yeah. The background on this is that Johnson served as a state representative from 1999 to 2004, including 3 years as the House Speaker. After leaving office, he ran a lobbying firm in Lansing before serving as the chair of the Michigan Cannabis Licensing Board from 2017 to 2019, according to the court documents. Johnson was at the heart of this corrupt scheme, Totten says, outlining cash payments and other perks like private chartered flights through Delele's companies.
The investigation, which started in 2017, was spearheaded by the FBI. Rooting out corruption is exceptionally difficult, the FBI Special Agent Jim Taraska told reporters. Taraska thanked forensic accountants and computer forensic examinators who helped determine the money trail and digital evidence to support the charges.
For years, the FBI has been warning states about the threat of public corruption posed by the cannabis industry. Local officials have been charged with similar crimes from California to Massachusetts, and corruption alleges targeting state officials in Arkansas and Missouri have been swirling for years. Well, I can tell you, I'm not blaming the cannabis industry. We got some politicians that have issues here.
Yeah. They're corrupt in many industries. This is just one more.
Correct.
Yeah, some more details. Dalali, or however we're pronouncing it, operated a company that was seeking a medical cannabis license from the board. Pierce and Brown lobbied on behalf of another company that was seeking a license. Johnson not only voted in favor of these companies obtaining license, but also provided valuable non-public information about the anticipated rules surrounding the medical cannabis program, court documents allege. Pierce and Brown attempted to hide payments to Johnson by funneling them through various companies that Johnson controlled, Totten explained. These payments came out of their clients' retainer fees, according to court documents.
David Grimm, an attorney for Brown, said his client cooperated with the FBI like a good citizen before even hiring a lawyer, and that he didn't know any of the big fish in this case. Attorneys for the other defendants did not immediately return requests for comment.
Yeah, so what's next? All 4 defendants are expected to be arraigned and have plea hearings in the next 1 to 2 weeks, Taunton said. The investigation is ongoing, and Terkaza, asked any members of the public who have information related to the charges to contact the FBI.
Yeah, exactly. The 4 defendants pledged to cooperate with an ongoing investigation. Johnson and Delele face a maximum of 10 years in prison and a fine of $250,000.
Holy Joe. In his plea deal, Johnson agreed to forfeit the $110,000 in bribes, and the U.S. Attorney's Office agreed not to oppose his request for a reduction in offense level, which would impact his sentencing. Pierce and Brown face a maximum of 5 years in prison and a fine of $250,000. Wow.
There you go. Crime.
Wow.
Doesn't always pay.
No.
You're paying it. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it is time to hear from our sponsors, and for Al and I to take a little medication session. You're watching the Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News here on Pace Radio Network and cbgtv.com.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net. In February of 2022, the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club and Ted Smith were fined $6.5 million. This for helping 8,500 patients with access to medical cannabis. In our interview with Ted, he spoke to us about how people can donate to help in an upcoming court challenge. And here is part of that interview. From what I've seen lately, I believe that you've got something that you're trying to do as far as fundraising to deal with this next court challenge.
For now, people can write checks directly to Jack Lloyd Law Corporation or send e-transfers to Save the VCBC at gmail.com. I guess those are the 2 easiest ways for people to help right now.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Cannabis edibles are an effective way to manage pain and other ailments, especially when you deal with your trusted partner, Legacy 420, in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. You see, we lab test every product on site to ensure proper dosage every time, which is critical when consuming cannabis edibles. All Legacy 420 edibles are made by our classically trained baker and chocolatier, and we also have super tasty vegan options.
Our baker has been in the industry for 25 years. She's also a chocolatier. Everything from savory to sweet, your chocolate bars, brownies, butter tarts, you name it, we make it.
Talk to our knowledgeable Cannatex about our incredible variety available. Give your trusted partners a call. Legacy 420 out on your road.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Welcome back. You're watching the Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News, your Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News source here on the Pace Radio Network, CBG TV, and Boxcast apps found on your Roku and Fire Sticks, as well as everywhere else we stream. And I didn't click during the commercials.
You didn't. I noticed that.
Isn't that
so
terrible?
Since we're talking about commercials and you're getting the next storyline, I'm just going to let you know, last night during the Pace Radio Show, our guest, Dustin Hawksworthy of Fat Nugs Magazine out of Georgia, he was really impressed about our commercials. He couldn't believe it. He said that he's never seen that, like watching a show. He says, I watch TV, stuff like that. He said, never seen anything cannabis related. He says, I had to sit back and watch yours. He says he was ecstatic. He really liked them. So
That's awesome.
I was happy to hear that.
Yeah, well, you've done a wonderful job with the commercials every single time. So yeah, I had a guest as well comment on the commercials.
Good.
So yeah,
you don't see cannabis commercials like when you're watching regular television.
No.
So he thought it was great to be able to see them. And so, when I started the Reefer Reporters back in 2008 at Rock 107 in Belleville, the first thing they said to me was, "How do you make a commercial on cannabis?" Because we had a sponsor for the segment.
Cool.
They didn't know because they'd never done it before.
Well, you've done it plenty, and you do a fantastic job.
With help from many.
Yes.
Yeah.
Heading on to the first story after the break, we are heading over to Microsoft Start, actually, and we're going to learn a little bit about Washington House passes the bill establishing framework for psilocybin use.
Yeah, Washington State is creeping towards legalizing psilocybin services, perhaps following on Oregon's footsteps. The House passed the bill Tuesday that would allow the state to establish a framework for the use of the medicine. Senate Bill 5263 would allow the state to establish an advisory board and task force to provide advice and recommendations on developing a regulatory framework for access to psilocybin. If ever legalized, only Washington residents who are 21 and older would be able to access it.
Senator Jesse Solomon, who is a Democrat from Shoreline, is a chief sponsor of the bill. He issued a press release celebrating the next step towards the bill's passage. Although this topic is new to many legislators, this bill will facilitate well-informed conversations to create a safe and regulated process for psilocybin access in a near future. Access to psilocybin can unlock the door to a brighter future for those struggling with mental health injuries. He said disorders. I call them injuries.
Yeah, I see that. The bill previously passed the Senate in a vote of 41-7 and passed the House Tuesday with a vote of 87-10. It received bipartisan support, which is good. The House amended the bill by adding a pilot program where the University of Washington would use psilocybin to serve veterans and first responders with PTSD, depression, and substance use disorder.
Because the bill was amended, it now heads back to the Senate for a second vote. Ahead of the House vote, Representative Nicole Marcy, a Democrat from Seattle, addressed her fellow lawmakers and said, "This bill helps make progress towards addressing the trauma some people are grappling with. This bill will allow us to learn more about how we can apply psilocybin services to addressing not only the trauma impacts that our military veterans and first responders have experienced, but other behavioral health conditions, and help all of us work through how we move towards a regulated approach to psilocybin in our state," she said.
Republican Rep Travis Couture from Allen, which is 10 different ways you can spell Allen, agreed and said he's hopeful psilocybin treatment can provide relief to veterans and first responders who are suffering from PTSD. Couture is a Navy veteran and said the issue hits close to home for him. He says that this bill is a symbolic move towards doing something, anything for veterans and first responders who have to go through the worst of the worst every single day.
Yeah, while he's a strong supporter of the bill, other Republicans opposed it. Representative Joe Schmick from Colfax was one of the 10 House representatives who voted against it. He's afraid the passage of this bill and moving forward with psilocybin legalization could allow the medication to enter the hands of people who aren't allowed to use it.
Yeah. Now, while he says that while there is good for doing this, and many people have benefited, there's fears on the Republican side that we're opening up a door for yet another drug that will be detriment to our society in the wrong hands. So for those reasons, Republican votes will be mixed, he said. If passed, the task force that's formed as a result of the bill would also be responsible for determining how the state will prevent psilocybin products from being distributed to people who are not allowed to have them, and how it will prevent psilocybin products from being taken to other states.
Okay, So are we going to stop everybody from walking in the woods? Because that's the only way that you can 100% stop it. You have to stop everybody everywhere from going anywhere near where any mushrooms grow.
Yeah, yeah. And
Right?
you know what the other thing is if you stuff makes it into jails.
Yeah.
Contraband makes it into jails. And if you can't keep things out of a locked society, how do you keep them out of an unlocked society?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Like in Oregon, the Washington Psilocybin Advisory Board would be established within the state health department. The bill would require the advisory board to meet at least 5 times a year until July 1st, 2024. And after that date, the board would be required to meet at least once a quarter.
Because my puppy. The bill would also allow for an interagency psilocybin work group to be formed with members from the Department of Health, the Liquor and Cannabis Board, and the Department of Agriculture. This group would be required to review indigenous practices with psilocybin and review medical research and clinical trials involving psilocybin. And in Oregon, voters approved a ballot measure in 2020 to allow legal, regulated use of psilocybin. And then Oregon was the first state to legalize the use of psychedelic mushrooms.
Yep. Research has shown that psilocybin can relieve major depressive disorder symptoms in adults. And the state finalized its rules by the end of 2022. And in 2023, Oregon began accepting applications for manufacturing, laboratory, service centers, and facilitators.
The use, sale, and possession of psilocybin is illegal in the United States under federal law. Well, I'm not surprised there.
Yeah. Yep. But hopefully things will change quickly. And again, around the world, It's an amazing medication that, we can benefit from.
Exactly. Many people are, and many more should have the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. Heading over to marijuana moment, we are going to stick with Washington. Washington lawmakers set to enact interstate cannabis sales bill.
Oh, interesting. Lawmakers in Washington state are on the cusp of passing legislation that would set the stage for licensed cannabis businesses to be able to engage in cross-border commerce with cannabis companies in other legal states. Perfect. The state's House of Representatives approved the bill SB 5069 in a 71-26 vote on Wednesday. Members approved a minor amendment on the House floor to correct what was described as a Scrivener's error in a version passed by the Senate last month. The fix means the legislation still needs one more final Senate nod before it can proceed to Governor Jay Inslee's desk for a signature.
The measure would not immediately allow interstate cannabis commerce. Rather, it would give the governor the authority to enter into agreements with other legal states only if there's a federal law change to allow for the interstate transfer of cannabis, or if the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ, issues an opinion allowing or tolerating cannabis commerce across the state lines. Sometimes government follows behind events. This is a small way of being proactive. Representative Sharon Weil, who's a Democrat, said on the floor on Wednesday, should the federal government act when we are not in session? We don't know how they would act. We don't know when they will act. But this sends a message and sets us up so that we can respond reasonably.
And it kicks in right away as soon as the federal government changes things instead of waiting to go through the process.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Both other West Coast states, Oregon and California, have already adopted similar laws. California's, however, would also allow the state's attorney general to trigger the policy change through a legal opinion absent any new federal moves. And in January, state regulators requested that Attorney Bob Bonantas office prepare that guidance.
Yeah, this puts us on the same playing field as those other states, and it also makes sure that our vendors and our licenses are informed of what's going on in the world. Wiley said on the Washington House floor on Wednesday, under the bill, if either of the two federal conditions are met, state regulators would be required to provide written notice of the federal policy change, as well as any state level statutory changes necessary to authorize the sale, delivery, and receipt of cannabis from out of state companies. Regulators would also need to adopt necessary rules for cannabis imports and exports, although authority to actually enter agreements with other states would rest in the governor's hands.
Products imported from out-of-state businesses would be required to comply with Washington regulations, including those related to packaging and labeling. Supporters in Olympia have described the proposal as a way to keep Washington's legal cannabis industry competitive with out-of-state businesses ahead of what many view as the inevitable end to federal prohibition. Come on, it can't come soon enough.
Ahead of last month's Senate floor vote, Senator Ann Rivers, who's a Republican, the bill's prime sponsor, called Washington, which legalized cannabis for adults through the ballot initiative in 2012, a leader in the cannabis industry. But she warned that the state could be left in the dust if we're out of town or unable to take action when federal law changes. We know that legalization of on the federal level is coming. We've seen bills introduced, and it feels like it's getting closer, she said. SB 5069, she said, entrust the governor to look out for this industry and make sure that the businesses can flow from our state to other states and back to us in a legal way, in a safe way, and in a way that can be enforced.
The Washington state legislation represents the latest state-level attempt to prepare for eventual interstate cannabis commerce, even as cannabis remains federally prohibited. California's governor signed a similar measure last year, while Oregon Governor Kate Brown signed interstate cannabis commerce legislation into law in 2019. This will give us all three West Coast states with interstate commerce laws. Adam Smith, founder of the nonprofit Alliance for Sensible Markets, which advocates for interstate cannabis trade. This is not an accident. We've been working on this since 2019 when we passed the original bill in Oregon.
Nice. Smith told Marijuana Moment he doesn't expect states to wait for federal legalization to begin pursuing cross-border deals. He thinks the laws passed by the West Coast states will nudge the Biden administration into issuing agency guidance allowing interstate commerce to take place. We are sitting on the cusp, Smith said. Now we want states to say, hey, we have gone through this political process. We are ready to engage in conversation with other states. We just need to know that when you say you will not prosecute folks for acting under the state regulation, that you actually mean it.
They're looking for something similar to the Cole memo, which was done back in the Obama days, where the government announced that they're not going to, go after the states for doing it, and they can decide, but they weren't legalizing it. So now they could just turn around and do another memo and say, it's in between two states that agree on it. We're not going to prosecute them.
Yep.
So, if the DOJ is going to tolerate state regulation of a federally illegal industry, there's absolutely no reason there's no practical reason for them to say, oh no, but we'll draw a line at moving cannabis from California to New Jersey. Exactly. Ultimately, bills like Washington, Smith said, would allow states to opt into a national cannabis market that could provide opportunities for longtime producer states, including those on the West Coast, to sell products to other states for higher prices. Meanwhile, states with conditions less conducive to growing cannabis or those just setting up a legal market could import products from elsewhere rather than each state creating its own legal industry.
None of this is about opening up commerce between Oregon, California, and Washington, sending underpriced cannabis back and forth between these borders. It's not going to help anyone, he said. What this is about is opening up the possibility of deals and conversations with medical and adult use states where growing cannabis is more difficult, more expensive, and where it doesn't make sense to incentivize a lot of investment in production. Smith, whose
Yeah.
organization worked with the Cannabis Alliance and Washington Sun and Craft Growers Association in building support to pass the Washington bill, predicted some of the first cross-border agreements between states could be inked by the end of the year. I think it's the most important shift that will happen since the first states legalized, he said. And I think most people don't see it coming. And I think it's going to help force national legalization.
Yeah. It'll just come down. It's just going to be the federal government. It's going to be the only one that's going to have it illegal.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. Lawmakers were working through dozens of bills ahead of the end of the legislation session this month, including a handful of drug-related proposals. One Senate measure was approved by the House on Tuesday, would commit the state to further studying psilocybin for therapeutic use. A House amendment to the bill would establish a pilot program at the University of Washington aimed at treating veterans and first responders. Because the pilot program was not contained in the version of the bill that passed in the Senate, it needs the Senate sign-off before going to the governor.
Yep. Both chambers have also passed legislation that would prohibit employees in the state from discriminating against job applicants who use test positive for cannabis use during the hiring process. It would not apply to off-duty cannabis use by people already employed.
Okay, does that mean so if you're already employed and your employer wants you to be tested for cannabis, that they can?
If they can?
I don't know.
I'm not sure. It didn't say much more than that, hey?
Yeah, I know. It just sort of left me hanging there.
Yep. And the last paragraph came out of nowhere.
Going out of nowhere, exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
On to the next story. We are heading over to In Focus, this publication is called, and we're going to learn that Germany waters down their plan to legalize cannabis after the European Union talks.
Yeah. Germany on Wednesday presented legislation that would allow cannabis possession and private cultivation, but not widespread commercial sales in shops for the time being. Now, they announced the plans to allow the possession of up to 25 grams of cannabis and the cultivation of a maximum of 3 plants at home.
The previous plan, which would have allowed cannabis to be sold in licensed stores nationwide, has been revised following concerns from the European Union. The legislation would allow for commercial distribution of cannabis only under special circumstances in so-called clubs, as presented by Health Minister Karl Lauterbach and Agricultural Minister Kem Ozdemir. Oh, that's not bad.
Way to go. Nice try. Yeah, the previous cannabis policy has failed. Now we have to go to new ways, Lauterbach says. Now, according to the revised plan, the first step will allow adults to form clubs for community cultivation of up to 500 members. Co-ops. Clubs can provide members of up to 50 grams of cannabis per month and no more than 25 grams at once, with those under the age of 21 allowed to get a maximum of 30 grams per month of lower potency cannabis. I like the idea of the community cultivation.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The clubs must also appoint youth protection, addiction, and prevention officers. Members would be able to cultivate cannabis at home with maximum of 7 seeds or 5 cuttings per month allowed to be passed on by clubs. The bill for this setup would be ready by the end of April, according to Ozdemir. A separate bill prepared for after the summer will allow a small number of licensed shops in certain German regions to do commercial distribution of cannabis, according to Lauterbach.
Now, the Cannabis Project has taken the next step today so that cannabis use will become legal this year, according to Ozdemir. Now, what's the new plan? It says the plan comes after the German government revised its initial plans to legalize cannabis from October last year. Originally, the government planned to allow the sale of cannabis for adults in specialized or specialist shops. For now, this has been ruled out as a plan was met with concerns from the European Commission.
After holding talks with Brussels, the German government has decided that such sales will be trialed only in certain model regions. The minister said the legislation foresees, amnesties for people who have previously been convicted of cannabis possession. They didn't specify who would be eligible for the amnesties.
So they're looking at that, which is good as far as
Yeah.
removing those past convictions. This came a bit of a conversation on LinkedIn. I got in a conversation with Owen Smith about it, and he was wondering what was the European Union's concerns, because the article doesn't touch on that. And so I went and did some digging, and it turns out that they basically have an agreement, the European Union, all the countries have an agreement that all drugs would remain illegal including cannabis. So that's where that's coming from. It's sort of like, when we legalized cannabis here, people were saying, what about the treaties we signed? What about the treaties we signed?
Yeah.
5 years later, the sky hasn't fallen.
Nope. No, and it won't.
Treaties and agreements can be redone, improved, updated.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Heading over to our last story. This one caught my eye, coming to us from the CBC. There's a study that discovered that people were using psychedelic medicines way back in the Bronze Age in Europe.
Wow. Holy smokes. I'm just going to read that little caption on there. It says a 3,000-year-old human hair, possibly from a shaman, contained traces of mind-altering substances. 3,000 years old. They can still detect that.
That's crazy.
Wow. Yeah. People have been using mind-altering substances for a long, long time. While archaeologists and historians have been suspecting that people in the Bronze Age Europe consumed psychedelic drugs, they now have hard scientific evidence to back it up.
That's so cool. And it's all thanks to several tiny strands of human hair found impeccably preserved in a 3,000-year-old burial site in Spain.
Wow.
Yeah. Those hairs, researchers have found, contain traces of 3 different alkaloid substances that are known to cause altered states of consciousness. Awesome.
It was amazing, Rafael Michael, a professor of archaeology prehistory at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, told, as it happens, host Neil Coxall. It is the first direct evidence in Europe of the consumption of psychedelic drugs. Michael co-authored a new study describing the findings, which was published this month in a report in the Scientific Reports, the journal.
It's a finding, says Maiko, that was decades in the making. It begins in the mid-90s with the discovery of a sealed grotto in Micora, an island off the coast of eastern Spain. The cave, called Caratics, contains the remains of about 200 Bronze Age people. Wow.
Look you see that picture? Look at that
Yeah.
picture. 3,000-year-old hair, people. Some of these people, say Michael, had their hair dyed red. Locks of their hair were found placed inside decorated tubular boxes made from wood and antlers. The archaeology finds inside the grotto were unusually well preserved because the cave's opening had long ago been sealed off by collapsed rubble.
Wow. It was a miracle to recover these strands of hair thanks to a very, very unique conditions, Maiko said. Early analysts of those hair samples didn't teach researchers much, he said, but over time, the science improved, so they tried again.
And this time around, they found evidence of 3 compounds that could produce from native plants. The hallucinogens, atropine, scopolamine, good one there, Al, and the stimulant ephedrine. All 3 are used in modern medicine for a wide variety of purposes, including atropine for countering nerve agent poisoning, scopolamine for treating motion sickness, and the other one is for lowering blood pressure during anesthesia.
Wow. The analyst suggests that the individual that the hair belonged to would have been consuming those psychoactive compounds regularly for at least a year before they passed away. This isn't the first clue that the Bronze Age people in what is now known as Europe use these medicines, much like folks in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica did.
But previous research was more circumstantial. For example, that word archaeological finds what appears to be smoking pipes. This is why keeping things remain in good condition important to allow future analysts.
There's no way to know for sure exactly how these ancient cultures use the mind-altering medications, but Maiko said the evidence suggests it was quite different from how we consume psychedelics today. In our society, we take the medicines probably to get away, to forget some disgusting situations or embarrassing situations, but we think that in the past, in Manchuria, the medications were used only by certain individuals to perform this specific social role, he said.
Could they have PTSD from the dinosaurs?
Probably. I would.
Know. I would. Our hypothesis is that these individuals were a kind of a shaman. Those shamans, Michael says, would have acted as a kind of intermediary between real everyday life and another perception, another state of mind.
University of Saskatchewan medical historian Erica Dyke, who wasn't involved in the study, has long studied the history of psychedelic drugs. She says there's plenty of evidence of their use throughout history in societies around the world, including ancient Egypt and China, and various pre-contact indigenous cultures.
But she says our modern framework for understanding drugs with clear delineations between medical, recreation, and spiritual use tend to fall short. She says there are ways that we now call psychedelic plants were used to try to reach into different depths of knowledge. And that might be considered like philosophical knowledge. It might be spiritual knowledge. It could even be political, she says.
It might have been considered sort of recreational, but also it was designed to help people achieve insight into different realms. She says studies like this one are important, and modern day researchers trying to assess risks and rewards of these medications would do well to take a look at history. And oh my goodness, cannabis people have been saying that forever.
Exactly. There is thousands of years now of evidence of humans using these kinds of substances, and there may be other ways of evaluating their effectiveness or their value to society, she says. She goes on to say that there are always really fascinating moments where we can begin to see how psychedelics were appreciated in a different moment, and that we might not have all the answers today. And there might actually be wisdom in looking back before we think about propelling them forward into a regulatory space that, doesn't really appreciate their long-standing uses.
Interesting.
Yes.
Well, that was a really interesting article, actually. I'm really glad that I grabbed that one because
education.
Cool.
Who knew?
Yeah. Who knew?
Who knew?
But
Exactly.
that's our show. We got through the 8 stories. We made good time, So from the legacy420.com news desk, that's our news for today. We hope you found it educational and informative and as interesting as we found that last story. Thank you to Legacy 420, Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, and to our viewers. Catch our next broadcast with Al and Reverend Kelly on Monday. And have a great weekend. We really appreciate you stopping by.
Bye-bye.
You're listening
See
to
you
the Pace
later.
Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Are you a cannabis content creator? Are you looking for a place to have your content seen? If you answer yes to both questions, then you need to check out cbgtv.com. CBGTV, broadcasting to a worldwide audience. Find us at cbgtv.com.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.